Hello everyone. In this lesson, we will learn how to set up authentication in your application. And we're going to use Firebase for that. Firebase is a service provided by Google that allows very simple way to set up authentication in your application. So basically, when you take the username and password from the user, instead of reinventing the wheel for the whole authentication process and then storing those username passwords somewhere, and then it actually a big responsibility to look after those username and password and storing them safely. So instead of that, we can use Firebase as a service and implement authentication in our application. From a user point of view, it will be transparent to the user. The user will not notice that we are using Firebase as our authentication system. So let's get started. We can start by searching for Firebase, and when you go to the Firebase website, it will allow you to click get started, and then if you don't have a Google account signed in, it will tell you to sign in with your Google account, and then basically you can sign up for Firebase, and I'll request you to do that. But since I already have a Firebase account, I'll go ahead and I'll click on go to console to go to the Firebase console. And once I am in the Firebase console, it's showing all the application or projects that I have. So for the current application, I will go ahead and I will click on add project, and I will type a project name there. And I'll provide a descriptive name there and go ahead and click on continue. And it will give different options, and we can enable Google Analytics so that we can look at the metrics that it collects. If you don't want at the beginning, you can switch it off and you can enable it later, but I will go ahead and click continue. Now, so for Google Analytics, it will actually ask for a Google Analytics account. So if you don't want that, you can disable this and create the project without the Google Analytics account. But if you have a Google Analytics account, you can use that. It has created our project. I can go to the project now. And then from the project page, we also need to actually create an app. So the same project we can use for an iOS app or an Android app, and in our case it's a web app. So I'll click on this web app and I will have to give a name for this. I can just call it Angular photo app, and then you can also use Firebase hosting for this, but in our case we are using AWS S3 for hosting, so we'll not select this and we'll click on register app. And then now it has created the application, and it also gave the configuration information for the app, and then how to actually configure that in a JavaScript way. But there's a slightly different way to do this in Angular, but I'll just go ahead and copy those details and keep it in a notepad. But if we lose that details, there is a way to actually get back that details later. So we can continue to console now, but as I was saying, if we don't have that information, we can go to the project settings and here it will actually give us that same details. And as part of this, as you can see, we have API key, and then they created a domain for the authentication, and there are also database URL. Those, if somebody is using Firebase as a database, they can use that too. In our case, we are not doing that, but these details will be needed for configuring Firebase. Now we're going to use Firebase for authentication. So let's go to the authentication tab, and in the authentication tab, it will ask you to set up the sign-in method. So let's click that set up sign-in method, and by default everything is disabled. So we'll go ahead and we'll just enable the simple provider for email and password. So we'll enable that. There is also an option for linking for authentication, so that someone can create a link and they can use that link for passwordless sign-in. We're keeping that disabled for now. Now the same way you can also enable Facebook, Twitter, and Google account based authentication, but for now we're just going with email and password based authentication. And initially there is no user here because we just set up the application. Now we have not used it yet. Now let's go ahead and see how we can use this in our Angular application. So for that, we'll use an npm package called Angular Fire, and the second version of it. So let's go ahead and search for authentication with Angular Fire 2, and it will give us a tutorial which will loosely follow here to set up the authentication. So the first step it is saying is installing and setting up Angular Fire 2. So for this we need to use this command npm install firebase Angular Fire 2 --save. So I'll go to the source code folder now and then type cmd in the address bar, and here I can paste that command to install Firebase, and it will go ahead and install Firebase. So let's go ahead and see in the tutorial, it's saying that another dependency for this is promise polyfile, so we'll also have to install that. So let's copy that and let's wait for the Angular Fire to be installed. So it finished Angular Fire, and now we can type that other command to install polyfile. So after polyfile installed, let's go ahead and see in the tutorial that the next thing we have to do is the configuration that we got. We can use that in environment variable in our Angular application, and where these environment variables are located are in source/environment/environment.ts. So now I'll copy this part and then I'll go to our source code folder from Visual Studio, and then I will open the environments, and you'll see that within environments there are two files, environment.typescript and then environment.prod. So typically people can have their local instance of Angular application and then later they host it in somewhere else, and then they can use separate Firebase application for those. So this will allow us to do different environment variables to be used there, but since in our case is the same information, so we can paste that information there, and in one case production equals to true, and in another case production will be false. But as you can see here, the API key, auth, domain, database URL, the actual values are not provided, just XX is given. So we need to get those value, and as we have saved them in this text file, we can copy those values from there and then we can paste them here. And same for production, we're using the same details, same Firebase application. So once we saved that, the next thing we'll need to do is, let's go ahead and check in the tutorial. So here what we're doing is we need to add this in our app module, and for that what they're doing is they're doing this import. So let's go ahead and do that import part. So app module, and we are adding those import statements. And next they are also importing a authentication service or auth service. So we'll get back to this one, but let's go ahead and see what other changes they are doing here. So in the import section, they're telling here to import Angular Fire module and Angular Fire auth module. So I will add those in our app module. So in the import section, we can add them there. And then next they are adding this auth service that they have imported here as a provider. Now let me quickly tell about service. So similar to component, Angular has a concept called service. What a service is a piece of logic that is reusable across multiple components. And the purpose for service is that to satisfy two important software engineering rules. One is DRY, which is do not repeat yourself. So you are writing some reusable code, so we are putting it in a class so that we can reuse it. And then the next one is single responsibility principle. So all the user related thing will be in user service, all the business logic related to user. The same way all the album related logic can be in the album service. That's the purpose of this service. So here they're using a auth service for this. In our case, we can call this something else. Let's say we are going to call this user service. So let's go ahead and generate that service. So we can call ng generate service and then the service name, so user, and this will create the user service for us. And then once we have the user service, now we can import the user service and we can put this as a provider. Now for Angular version 6 and above, this provider part, putting the service in the provider, might not be necessary, just for your information, but we'll go ahead and follow this tutorial and we'll add the user service in the provider section. So provider user service, and once we type it here, it will complain that the user service is not imported. So we can use this quick fix to import the user service. So now we have imported the user service. Next, this user service, we need to use this from the login component. So let's go in the login component and we can add that user service as a dependency here. And the way we do this is we need to give a name for a local instance. So this is a class variable for this component. So within this class, we will call this user service, and this is actually of the type user service. And again, it will complain here that user service is not imported, and we can go ahead and we can use the quick fix to import it. And once we have added the user service as a dependency here, now anywhere within this class, we can actually use the keyword this to call the user service. Actually, we have to use the keyword private. So now within the class, we can call this dot user service, and then we can call a method from that service. So I will go to an example of that later. Now let's look at the user service. So this is a service that Angular created for us, but it doesn't have any functionality. So we're going to add some functionality here. Let's follow the tutorial for that. So here they showed how to create the auth service, which in our case we are calling user service. And then in the service, they are actually adding this import that we'll be needing for communicating with Firebase. So I will go ahead and add those import in our user service class. So this is complaining about observable not being used, but we'll start using it soon. So within this service, they have a class variable user observable for a Firebase user. And in the constructor, they are actually creating a dependency to the Firebase authentication system using this library Angular Fire Auth, and they're declaring this.user equals to Firebase auth dot authentication state of the user. So we'll add that. Now the next thing we're going to add is a sign up method and a login method. And what the sign up method and login method is doing is actually calling the Firebase auth and calling a particular method there to create user with email and password. So we'll add those method in our class. So now we have these two methods in our user service class for sign up and login, and sign up and login, which is calling Firebase authentication for sign up and login. Now we need to call this method from our login component. So now let's get back to the login component and also open the HTML for this. So the login component has this email and password field, but we don't have any corresponding variable in the class. So we'll create those corresponding variable or attribute in our class. So we'll go inside the login component and we'll create those class level attribute. So let's call them email. And when we are creating this attribute in Angular, it actually allows us to be type specific. So we can also say that this email variable is actually of type string, and another variable password, this password variable is also string. And now once we have those variables, we can actually go to the component, and in the component in the email field we can actually use the two-way data binding to connect this particular field to the email attribute that we have. So we'll use the two-way data binding syntax, which is this square bracket and inside that regular bracket, and we'll use the syntax ng model, and we'll call this to be the variable email. And similarly for password, we'll call this password. And so we have the same field twice for another form where the user can actually sign up. So we can actually use this same two-way data binding here as well. And for the password, same approach. And so once we have that, now we have created two-way data binding between our form and the class, but we need to take an action once user fill up those fields and then they click on the button. So for that we'll use the action or event binding. So when the user click on this submit button, which is for sign up, so we are going to call, so we'll use this event binding click. When the user click on it, we're going to call the sign up method, which we have not declared yet, but we are just declaring the method name here because this is going to call the sign up method in the component, not in the service, and we don't have the sign up method in the component yet. So similarly for sign in button, we'll add a reference. For event binding, when someone clicks on it, we call the login method. Now if we go back to the component, we need to create those method. One is login method and another is sign up method. Now whenever we write a little bit of code, it is a better idea to actually try to test that code. So let's see if this part is getting called. So for that we can just type console.log, and then we can say a message here that user tried to log in. And then similarly, when someone clicks on the sign up, we can say that user tried to sign up. Now we can go ahead, we can start the application. So it is compiling our application, and at the end it will open the application in browser as well. Since we have installed Angular Fire, it is compiling that as well. So it opened the application but gave an error. Let's go ahead and see. So it is complaining about observable because RxJS has no exported member observable. Let's go ahead and see that in the user service. It is complaining that RxJS has no exported member observable. So let's comment that, and then it is complaining about, and we can use the quick fixed import observable from module RxJS. We can use that, and it should fix the problem for us. So it has finished the compiling. Now you can go to the application and we can go to the login component. And in the login component, so we added some functionality to this sign in button. So to check that, we'll open the inspect window and we'll go to the console, and you can see here, if ng model is used within a form tag, either the name attribute must be set or the form control must be defined as standalone. So it is complaining about the form. So here, let's go ahead and see here that we have this form and it is complaining about that. But we're not going to use any form specific functionality. We'll use those. We're not going to submit any form. Actually, we're going to take those values from the data binding. So we can actually delete this form tag because we're not going to use the form specific functionality here. And then same goes for this other form. To get rid of that error. Now we can go here and refresh, and there is no error here. But now if we click on the sign in, it will say here that user tried to log in. Similarly, if we go to the sign up, and if we try to sign up, it will say that user tried to sign up. Okay, so our action is working. When we click on login or sign up, it is calling the component method. But now the next thing we'll have to do is, from the component, we'll need to call the service so that actually the login or the sign up happens. So let's do that. So let's go to the component and then see here, when the user tried to log in, after that, what we can do is this keyword, we can use that, and then we can get the user service, and then the user service has the method login. So we can call that login method, and in the login method we have to pass an email and password, and then the email will be the email field that we have here, and that email field will have the updated email using the two-way data binding, and then the same way this dot password. So we can call the user service method this way. And similarly, when the sign up is clicked, we can click, we can, instead of calling the login method, we can call the sign up method from the user service, which are defined here. And so when the sign up is called, then it will actually try to create a user, and if it is successful, it will give a success message. Otherwise, it will say something went wrong. And then when login happens, it will say nice, it worked. Otherwise, it will say something went wrong, and it will give the error message. So let's try that in action. So let's initially try to do a sign in without signing up, and that should give us an error. So we'll try ifd@gmail.com, and then we'll try a password here, and then we'll click on sign in, and it says user tried to log in, and then it gave the error that something went wrong, there is no user record, which makes sense because we have not signed up yet. So now we can go to the sign up, and we can also try here by giving an email address which is not actually an email, and then we can try to sign up, and that also gave us the error that something went bad, this email address is badly formatted. So now let's try the success criteria. So ifd@gmail.com, so we are giving a properly formatted email address, and then we're giving a password there, and we're going to click sign up. So user tried to sign up, and then seems like it worked, and then it is giving that the sign in actually worked, and it sent us some user details. But now, and here the email address is there, so the sign up worked. We can now go back to the Firebase, and if we refresh, it will show us that a user actually tried to sign up, and here is the user ID. Now the next thing we can try to do is, since we have the user now, we can try to sign in with that same email address, but we can pass a wrong password there, something different than what we typed before, and then we can try to sign in, and it will give us that user tried to log in, something went wrong, the password is invalid, or the user does not have a password. Okay. Or the other thing we can try to do is, same user, we can try to sign up again with a different password, and if we try to click, it will say something went wrong, the email address is already in use by another account, so it will not allow us to do that. So all this scenario that usually happens during a sign up process, Firebase is handling all those for us. Now finally, let's try to sign in with the correct password. Sign in, user tried to log in, nice, it worked. So one other thing at the same time we want to do is, once the user signed in or signed up, we don't want this email address or password to show up anymore, right? Because it is done. So what we can do for that is, once we call this and success or failure happened, especially in the success case, what we can do here is we can do the, so not here, sorry, in the login component. Once we call the method, after that we can actually remove the email and make it empty, and we can remove the password and we can make it empty as well, so that they don't show up in the form anymore. So we do that for sign up as well as for login. So now let's try this again. So we go ahead and in the sign in we type ifty@gmail.com and we type the password that we used before and we click on sign in. They goes away from the form and we get this message that it worked. So that's how actually sign in and sign up is implemented and working in our application, and we used Firebase for that, and we used Angular Fire to integrate our Angular application with Firebase backend service. Thank you.